Windsurfing is a surface water sport that combines elements of surfing and sailing. It consists of a board usually 2.5 to 3 meters long, with displacements typically between 60 and 250 liters, powered by wind on a sail. The rig is connected to the board by a free-rotating universal joint and consists of a mast, two-sided boom and sail. The sail area generally ranges from 2.5 square meters to 12 square meters depending on the conditions, the skill of the sailor, the type of windsurfing being undertaken and the weight of the person windsurfing. Some credit S. Newman Darby with the origination of windsurfing by 1964 on the Susquehanna River, Pennsylvania, USA, when he invented the sailboard, which, incidentally, he did not patent. In 1964, Darby began selling his sailboards. A promotional article by Darby was published in the August 1965 edition of Popular Science magazine. While Darby's sailboard incorporated a pivoting rig, it was square-rigged and suffered all the associated limitations. You operated the sailboard with your back to the lee side of the kite-shaped square sail. Darby's article boasted that, you can learn to master a type of maneuvering that's been dead since the age of the picturesque square riggers. Windsurfing can be said to straddle both the laid-back culture of surf sports and the more rules-based environment of sailing. Although it might be considered a minimalistic version of a sailboat, windsurfing offers experiences that are outside the scope of other sailing craft designs. Windsurfers can perform jumps, inverted loops, spinning maneuvers, and other freestyle moves that cannot be matched by any sailboat. Windsurfers were the first to ride the world's largest waves, such as Jaws on the island of Maui, and, with very few exceptions, it was not until the advent of tow-in surfing that waves of that size became accessible to surfers on more traditional surfboards. Extreme waves aside, many expert windsurfers will ride the same waves as surfers do. At one time referred to as surfing's ginger-haired cousin by the sport's legendary champion Robbie Naish, windsurfing has long struggled to present a coherent image of the sport to outsiders. As a result of attempts to claim the word windsurfer as a trademark, participants have been encouraged to use different names to describe the sport, including sailboarding and board sailing. The term windsurfing has persisted as the accepted name for the sport, and the word windsurfer persists for both participants and equipment. Windsurfing is predominantly undertaken on a non-competitive basis. Organized competition does take place at all levels across the world, including in the Olympics. Typical formats for competitive windsurfing include Formula windsurfing, speed sailing, slalom, course racing, wave sailing, supix, and freestyle. The boom of the 1980s led windsurfing to be recognized as an Olympic sport in 1984. However, windsurfing's popularity saw a sharp decline in the mid-1990s, thanks to licensing battles, and equipment becoming more specialized and requiring more expertise to sail. The sport experienced a modest revival as new beginner-friendly designs became available. Further pressure came as a proportion of avid windsurfers took up the similar sport of kite surfing. History. Windsurfing, as a sport and recreational activity, did not emerge until the latter half of the 20th century, but before this, there have been sailing boats of various designs that have used wind as the driving force for millennia, and Polynesians have been riding waves for many of them, undertaking day trips over oceans standing upright on a solid board with a vertical sail. In 1948, 20-year-old Newman Darby was the first to conceive the idea of using a handheld sail and rig mounted on a universal joint so that that he could control. His small catamaran, the first rudderless sailboard ever built that allowed a person to steer by shifting his or her weight in order to tilt the sail fore and aft. Darby did not file a patent for the sailboard. However, he is widely recognized as its inventor as well as the first to conceive, design, and build a sailboard with a universal joint. In his own words, Darby experimented throughout much of the 1950s and 1960s, and it wasn't until 1963 that an improved sailboard with a conventional stayed sloop rig sail arrangement made it more stable than the one built in 1948. In 1964, Darby began selling his sailboards. 12-year-old Peter Chilvers is often cited for inventing a sailboard in 1958. In the 1960s, Jim Drake was the first to solve many problems of getting the board to sail, while Hoyle Schweitzer was the first to be successful in marketing the sailboard. In 1964, during a discussion on water sports over a brandy at his home in Southern California, Rand Corporation aeronautical engineer Jim Drake and his former Rockwell boss and good friend Fred Payne, who worked at the Pentagon, discussed options for creating a wind-powered water ski which would allow Payne to travel on the Potomac River. That night they developed the idea of a kite-powered surfboard. On later reflection, Drake didn't like the integrity of the idea and dismissed it. There were already a number of sailboard designs available, and Drake also was concerned about the integrity of a design needing taut wire close to a human body to keep the sail upright. Still developing the idea, Drake's wife met the pregnant Diana Schweitzer, and the two families became good friends through the children. Drake mentioned the idea to surfer Hoyle Schweitzer, who wanted to develop it, but Drake was still unsure of how to control and steer what he envisaged in a design concept as a surfboard with upright sail design, whereby the sailor stood upright on the board holding the sail. The technical problem was that most boats steer by varying the angle of attack in the water between the center board and the rudder, and Drake's question came down to simple operation of how a standing person could control both the power of the sail as well as the direction of the craft. In 1967, while driving between his home and a contract at the Norton Air Force Base in San Bernardino, Drake had time to reflect on early 17th century base sail ship control. Rudders then were weak and ineffective, mostly used for trimming course. Hence, with multi-masted boats, the sailors would trim the upper sails on the forward and rearwards masts to steer the ship. Dismissing the idea of a design with two upright sails, Drake decided to move the sail by rotation, as moving it linearly would require a mechanical system. Experimenting with a rotational design which became the concept for the universal joint, whereby the angle of attack of the sail to the board could be varied to allow control of both power and craft direction. Drake finished the design by using an earlier but for them failed invention of East Coast racing sail, and added a wishbone boom. Windsurfing International. On March 27, 1968, Hoyle Schweitzer and Jim Drake filed the very first windsurfing patent, which was granted by the USPTO in 1970. There is no evidence that they had knowledge of any prior inventions similar to theirs, but Drake accepted in retrospect that although he can be credited with invention, he was probably no better than third, behind Midwest-based Newman Darby and Englishman Peter Chilvers. The early windsurfing boards were made of foam in the garages of Schweitzer and Drake, with the booms, tees and dagger boards handcrafted in teak. Hoyle subcontracted the manufacture of the teak items to boat builder Enels Ives in Taiwan. but the quality and costs of transportation brought other issues. One of the early customers was Bert Salisbury, and the first international shipment of a container of boards went to Sweden. Early customers also included Lufthansa pilots who had read about the board, who simply included one as personal luggage on the return journey from Los Angeles International Airport, to ensure the quality of the product and handle marketing. In 1968, Hoyle and Diana Schweitzer founded the company Windsurfing International in Southern California to manufacture, promote and license a windsurfer design. The jointly owned patent was wholly licensed to Windsurfing International, working in a factory unit in Torrance, California. Hoyle, who had previously built personal surfboards in his garage, was unhappy with the durability of the early Baja board. Quote, he therefore developed a new mold, based on an old Malibu surfboard design that Matt Kivlin had developed, which the company subcontracted for mass manufacture to Elmer Good. The company registered the term windsurfer as a trademark at the United States Patent and Trademark Office in 1973, launching the craft as a one design class. Going One design was influenced by the success of the Laser and Hobie Cat classes. Each windsurfer had an identical computer-cut sail, a technology new at the time and pioneered by Ian Bruce and the Laser class. In 1968, Hoyle's computer business collapsed, and he and Diane moved to Newport Beach. At the same time, Drake accepted a 2-year assignment to the Pentagon and moved to Washington, D.C. Immediately, Hoyle offered Drake to buy out his half of the patent, and it was only when Hoyle pointed out ownership of the company that the relationship between the pair began to fall apart. Having returned to California in 1973, Drake sold his half of the patent to Windsurfing International for the sum of $36,000. Patent disputes. Through the 70s, Schweitzer aggressively promoted and licensed the Windsurfing International design and licensed the patent to manufacturers worldwide, mainly through competition and the publication of a magazine. As a result, the sport underwent very rapid growth, particularly in Europe after the sale of the sub-license sold to 10K in the Netherlands. At the same time, Schweitzer also sought to defend his patent rights vigorously against unauthorized manufacturers. This led to a host of predating windsurfer-like devices being presented to courts around the world by companies disputing Windsurfing International's rights to the invention. Europe was now the largest growing market for windsurfers, and the sub-licensed companies, Tabua F2, Mistral, wanted to find a way to remove or reduce the royalty payments to Windsurfing International. Tabua lawyers found prior art in a local English newspaper which had published a story with a picture about Peter Chilvers, who as a young boy on Hayling Island on the south coast of England assembled his first board combined with a sail. In 1958, this board used a universal joint, one of key parts of the Windsurfing International's patent. They also found stories published about the 1948 invention of the sailboard by Newman Darby and his wife Naomi in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, in Windsurfing International Inc. v. Tabua Marine Limited, 1985 RPC 59, with Tabua backed financially by French sailing fan Baron Marcel Bic. British courts recognized the prior art of Peter Chilvers. It did not incorporate the curved wishbone booms of the modern windsurfer, but rather a straight boom that became curved in use. The courts found that the Schweitzer windsurfer boom claim was merely an obvious extension. It is worthy of note that this court case set a significant precedent for patent law in the United Kingdom. In terms of inventive step and non-obviousness, the court upheld the defendant's claim that the Schweitzer patent was invalid, based on film footage of Chilvers. Schweitzer then sued the company in Canada, where the opposition team, again financially backed by BIC, included Chilvers and Jim Drake, and Schweitzer lost again. After the cases, no longer obliged to pay Windsurfing International any royalty payments, the now renamed BIC Sport became the world's largest producer of windsurfing equipment, with an annual production of 15,000 boards. In 1983, Schweitzer sued Swiss board manufacturer Mistral and lost. Mistral's defense hinged on the work of U.S. inventor Newman Darby, who by 1965 conceived the sail board, a handheld square-rigged kite sail on a floating platform for recreational use. Eventually, U.S. courts recognized the Schweitzer windsurfer as an obvious step from Darby's prior art. Schweitzer had to reapply for a patent under severely limited terms, and finally it expired in 1987. Shortly thereafter, having lost its license royalty income, Windsurfing International ceased operations. In 1984, Australian courts determined a patent case, Windsurfing International Inc. Amp Anna v. Petty and Amp Anna, which attributed the first legally accepted use of a split boom to an Australian boy, Richard Eastaugh, between the ages of 10 and 13, from 1946 to 1949, aided by his younger brothers. He built around 20 galvanized iron canoes and hill trolleys which he equipped with sails with split bamboo booms. He sailed these in a sitting position and not as a windsurfer standing up near his home on the Swan River in Perth. The judge noted that Mr. Eastaugh greatly exaggerated the capacity of his galvanized iron canoes to sail to windward, and that there is no corroboration of Mr. Eastaugh's experiences by any other witness. Neither of his brothers or his father was called. It is acknowledged in the courts that the separate Eastaugh, Darby and Chilvers inventions predated the Schweitzer-Drake patent. Trademark disputes. Windsurfing International claimed trademark rights with respect to the word windsurfer. While this was registered in the United States for some years, it was not accepted for registration in many jurisdictions as the word was considered too descriptive. Registration was ultimately lost in the United States for the same reason. The Schweitzers initially chose the word for its descriptive quality. Unfortunately, they immediately set out diminishing its value by naming the company Windsurfing International and even referring to themselves and their own children as windsurfers, as the word was rejected as registrable in a number of countries. Lawyers advised that to be successful the word would have to be used as a proper adjective. They realized that this required a number of generic nouns to which the adjective would apply: sailboard, board sailing, planche of oil, segelbrett, and so on. The rearguard action was ultimately unsuccessful and arguably created considerable confusion which hampered marketing efforts in later years. Marketing. While the numerous patent and trademark disputes have left an unfortunate legacy, the fact is that these disputes did not occur until well after Windsurfing International, its licensees, class associations, retailers, schools and owners had built the sport to a successful commercial basis. That success brought imitation and then legal disputes. The launch phase saw a comprehensive development of infrastructure for a new sport and dramatic sales growth. boards and gear. In the 1970s and 1980s, windsurfers were classified as either shortboards or longboards. Longboards were usually longer than 3 meters, with a retractable dagger board, and were optimized for light winds or course racing. Shortboards were less than 3 meters long and were designed for planing conditions. However, this classification by length has become obsolete, as new techniques, designs, and materials have taken the sport in new directions. Most modern windsurfers are derived from the shortboard design, and are intended to be used ideally in planing mode, where the board is mostly skipping over the surface of the water, rather than cutting through and displacing the water. Planing is faster and gives more maneuverability, but requires a different technique from the displacement mode. Generally, smaller boards and smaller area sails are used as the wind increases, while windsurfing is possible under a wide range of wind conditions. Most recreational windsurfers prefer to sail in conditions that allow for consistent planing with multi-purpose, not overly specialized, free-ride equipment. Larger free-ride boards are capable of planing at wind speeds as low as 12 knots if rigged with an adequate, well-tuned sail in the 6 to 8 square meter range. The pursuit of planing in lower and lower winds has driven the development and spread of wider and shorter boards, with which planing is possible in wind speeds as low as 8 knots, if sails in the 10 to 12 square meter range are used. Modern windsurfing boards can be classified into many categories. Free-ride boards meant for comfortable recreational cruising at planing speed, mainly in flat waters or in light to moderate swell. They typically fall into the volume range of 90 to 170 liters. The so-called free-ride sailing movement diverged from course racing as more recreational sailors chose to sail freely without being constrained to sailing on courses around buoys. Formula windsurfing class shorter boards up to 1 meter in width for use in formula windsurfing races. See below for a more detailed description. Waveboards, smaller, lighter, more maneuverable boards for use in breaking waves. Characteristically, sailors on waveboards perform high jumps while sailing against waves, and they ride the face of a wave, performing narrow link turns in a similar way to surfing. Waveboards usually have a volume between 65 and 90 liters, with a length between 230 and 260 centimeters, and 50 to 60 centimeters in width. A general rule is for a sailor to use a waveboard whose volume in liters is about the same as the sailor's weight in kilograms, more volume, providing additional flotation for sailing in light winds, and less for high winds, where less volume is needed to achieve planing. In recent years, the average width of waveboards has increased slightly, as the length has shrunk, while the range of volume has been maintained the same more or less. According to board designers, this makes waveboards easier to use under a wider range of conditions by sailors of differing abilities. The most common sizes of sails used with waveboards are in the range of 4.0 to 6.0 square meters, depending on the wind speed and the weight of the sailor. Freestyle boards, related to waveboards in terms of maneuverability. These are wider, higher volume boards geared specifically at performing acrobatic tricks on flat water, usually 80 to 110 liters in volume, and about 240 to 250 centimeters in length, with widths frequently in excess of 60 centimeters. Freestyle boards began to diverge more noticeably in design from waveboards in the early part of the 2000 decade, as aerial tricks became the predominant part of the freestyle repertoire, superseding old-school moves, in which the board did not leave contact with the water. Slalom boards, short boards aimed at top speed, rather than maneuverability or ease of use. Speed boards, in essence an extremely narrow and sleek slalom board, built for top speed only. Beginner boards. These often have a dagger board, are almost as wide as formula boards, and have plenty of volume, hence stability. Racing longboards, Mistral 1 design, or the Olympic RSX class race boards. Tandem board. Most popular tandem board on the market is the Starbridge Gemini 2. There are many attempts to bridge a gap between two of these categories, such as free race, freestyle wave, free formula, and so on. All these attempts are successful in their own right, but every shape has its specific strong points and disadvantages. In short, a board with a lot of scoop rocker, a tail kick will turn more easily and respond to foot steering, but top speed and upwind performance will suffer. A board with a straight mid and aft waterline will plane earlier, thus giving good upwind performance, but they will not foot steer without the sailor actively shifting weight. In 2013, the Norwegian inventor Kai Sundam Gesing patented his prototype, the Kickass, which is a fast freeride board that, by the push of a foot switch, changes its underwater tail shape into a pronounced tail kick, thus combining speed, upwind and turning in one hull. The whole mechanism weighs less than 400 grams. The board has not yet been put to production. The original Windsurfer board had a body made out of polyethylene filled with PVC foam. Later, hollow glass reinforced epoxy designs were used. Most boards produced today have an expanded polystyrene foam core reinforced with a composite sandwich shell that can include carbon fiber, Kevlar, or fiberglass in a matrix of epoxy and sometimes plywood and thermoplastics. Racing and wave boards are usually very light and are made out of carbon sandwich. Such boards are very stiff, and veneer is sometimes used to make them more shock resistant. Boards aimed at the beginners are heavier and more robust, containing more fiberglass. Sails. Modern windsurfing sails are often made of monofilm, Dacron and Mylar. Areas under high load may be reinforced with Kevlar. Two designs of a sail are predominant: camber-induced and rotational. Cambered sails have 1 to 5 camber-induces, plastic devices at the ends of battens which cup against the mast. They help to hold a rigid aerofoil shape in the sail, better for speed and stability, but at the cost of maneuverability and generally how light and easy to use the sail feels. The trend is that racier sails have camber-induces while wave sails and most recreational sails do not. The rigidity of the sail is also determined by a number of battens. Beginner sails often do not have battens, so they are lighter and easier to use in light winds. However, as the sailor improves, a batten sail will provide greater stability in stronger winds. Rotational sails have battens which protrude beyond the back aspect of the mast. They have to flip to the other side of the mast when tacking or jibing, hence the rotation in the name. Rotational sails have aerofoil shape on the leeward side only when filled with wind. They can be absolutely flat and depowered when sheeted out. In comparison with cambered sails, rotational designs offer less power and stability when sailing straight, but are easier to handle when maneuvering. Also, rotational sails are lighter and much easier to rig. The leading edge of a sail is called the luff. The mast is in the luff tube. The rear edge is called the leech. The front bottom corner of the sail, where the mast foot protrudes, is called the tack, and the rear corner, to which the boom is attached, is called the clew. The bottom edge, between the clew and the tack, is called the foot. A windsurfing sail is tensioned at 2 points, at the tack and at the clew. There is a set of pulleys for downhauling at the tack and there's a grommet at the clew. Most shape is given to the sail by a very strong downhaul, bending the mast in the luff tube. The outhaul tension is relatively weak, mostly to provide leverage for controlling the sail's angle of attack. The sail is tuned by adjusting the downhaul and the outhaul. Generally, the sail has to be trimmed more for stronger winds. More downhaul tension loosens the upper part of the leech, allowing the top of the sail to twist and spill the wind at the gusts and shifting the center of eft of the sail down. Releasing the downhaul tension shifts the center of eft up. More outhaul lowers the camber draft, making the sail flatter and easier to control, but less powerful. And less outhaul brings more overall depth to the sail. More low-end power shifts the center of eft upward and to the front, and may limit speed by increasing aerodynamic resistance. The disciplines of windsurfing require different sails. Wave sails are reinforced to survive the surf, and are flat when depowered to allow riding the waves like surfers do. Freestyle sails are also flat when depowered, and have high low-end power to allow quick acceleration. Free-ride sails are all-rounders that are comfortable to use and are meant for recreational windsurfing. Racing sails provide speed at the expense of qualities like comfort and maneuverability. The size of the sail is measured in square meters and can be from 3 square meters to 5.5 square meters for wave sails and from 6 square meters to 15 square meters for racing sails, with ranges for freestyle and free-ride sails spanning somewhere between these extremes. Learning sails for children can be as small as 0.7 square meters and racing sails being up to 15 square meters large.